Hi, everyone. Today is August 25th, and we're talking a little bit about uh, culture shock and in the uh, history, I was noticing that there was a Portuguese explorer about almost 500 years ago who was one of the first Europeans to arrive in Japan, and just imagining what would that have been like um, for them to visit, and for um, both cultures to be in contact at that time, and whether we've had these experiences of this kind of culture shock. And um, so um, I remember my first trip to Europe um, back in '99. So I was uh, 17 at the time. I hadn't yet turned 18, and that was like my first time leaving the country. So I was, I mean, I had been learning Spanish and French, so I was and kind of a bit more curious. But up until then, mainly speaking English for um, about 14 years before learning Spanish. And um, and then when I came to Mexico for the first time in 2001, yeah, there were moments of kind of, yeah, culture shock, and recognizing I don't know, eating at different times, or um, a lot of things in the service industry, people doing small tasks, um, and the requiring tips and things. So those were some things that caught my attention. For example, when I first came to Mexico, and tipping people who were bagging groceries, or uh, you know, people trying to wash the windshields at different stoplights, uh, or what else? Um, yeah, just lots of things that were requiring tips, and that I was not quite used to um, where I was growing up in California. Mainly just tipping a waiter at a restaurant, or maybe at the hotel, somebody who was bringing the bags to the room, or a sky cap at the airport, to get many bags from the car, uh, take them up to uh, the ticketing desk or registration. So I was a little bit more limited on those experiences on the tips, but and in Europe, um, mm, what were some things that would catch my attention? I think people being a little bit more open to uh, nudity in advertising and things like magazine cover pictures or shampoo commercials on TV, and coming from the States, those things kind of, I would say, yeah, kind of like shocked me in a way to see, like, whoa, okay, that's acceptable in the advertising. Um, uh, or obviously, if somebody is taking a shower, yeah, they. But in the advertising in the United States, those things would be edited out, or like the camera angles and things, to avoid, I don't know, shocking anybody. The, with the time now that I've been living outside of the States for about 20 years, I'm now faced with the opposite, which is kind of reverse kind of culture shock, where going back to the United States and just seeing things that are kind of very American, or so for example, like food portions, drink portions, and things just being what ends up being like small in the United States would probably be something very large in another, like Europe or something. So this is generally going to lead to overconsumption, or even adding to the effect of obesity and possibly diabetes if some of these drinks are heavily filled up with sugar or sugar substitutes and things. So it is alarming to see that is the standard, and that anybody questioning that standard is like that. Yeah, that it's not necessarily the healthiest situation. So trying to raise awareness of that when I like ask for half of something, or want a small, and getting eyebrows raised of like, why wouldn't you want the largest? So actively seeking ways to eat healthier when eating out. It can be tricky to do that. What else are some things? Having to use the car all the time, especially in like Southern California. So when I was living in Paris, I was getting into a habit of walking a lot more and using public transportation, like the subway, the bus, the tram, the train, and enjoying the fact that I didn't need a car. So there were times when I was trying to walk more in the city where I grew up, but there were a few areas that were not designed to encourage that. So I remember like walking between two shopping malls, which were like one in front of the other, but it was just not convenient to walk from one to the other. So I was a little annoyed by that. But everything was basically designed around the car, and not for the pedestrians. But it's not necessarily that case everywhere. There are obviously large cities in the U.S. like New York or Chicago where you do get a lot of walking opportunities in those areas. But when you get out in the suburbs, everything is just really spaced very widely. In it, you have to have a car in those situations. It's just not practical to be walking or using public transportation. So those are some things that in the urban planning, those kinds of things, I do appreciate how some of the like European cities, in Mexico, there's influence, I would say, especially where I live, there's an influence from the this kind of American style like suburbs and needing a car. But yeah, I don't know what else would be some reverse things. I do remember when I first came back to the U.S., one of my first trips, and after having spent at least a year or so, there was this underlying understanding in several historical areas and places of the impact, the historical impact on architecture and the preservation of the kind of patrimony. Well, I mean, in French, I know that is patrimoine. The kinds of things that the UNESCO, like World Heritage kind of things, and so the understanding is that because of bombings, air raids, and a lot of damage that occurred to many historical places during World War II, and that a lot of things to try to protect those things, they were surrounded by sandbags and crates, and hopefully to protect them, and then also things like stained glass windows or famous statues and paintings were moved to underground areas and to hopefully try to protect them as much as possible. And I do remember becoming kind of aware of this, of visiting one place in Chicago that had these really kind of beautiful stained glass windows, and I had to catch myself from asking the tour guide, like, oh, what happened during World War II to protect those? And I stopped myself from asking that question because I realized at that moment of like, no, there weren't any of these like air raids, dropping bombs on American cities during World War II. I mean, aside from the attack of Pearl Harbor, but that was just not on that American psyche, and I realized, like, okay, this was something that definitely did have an impact in Europe, and not so long ago. And when you see these tours, or you hear about the kind of what happened during World War II to kind of save those things. So that presence of that history, the historical significance, and those things that happened, they carry over some 50, 60 years later. It's still in that, I guess, like zeitgeist. So that's something that has kind of been in the back of my mind, of having lived in Europe and being aware of those things when I go back to visit home, and realize, like, some people are not aware of these things that affect other people. Or and with that in mind, when I first moved to Paris, I was very shocked or very scared, actually. The first Wednesday of each month at noon, there is a air raid siren. The warning system is tested, and I was in a class, I remember, and I hadn't really noticed this when I was on vacation, and then this kind of scared me, and I was looking around the other students, and nobody was reacting, and the teacher wasn't reacting, and I had to kind of ask the other people, like, what was that? But from the United States, not having that experience, or the only thing I remember was maybe visiting Hawaii, and there was that air raid siren as like testing their system, and that did kind of freak me out on like those memories of war documentaries and things like that. But yeah, those are just a few examples. Yeah. Hola a todos. Hoy es el día 25, y estamos hablando un poco de como intercambio cultural y los como choque cultural, y me acuerdo las primeras experiencias que yo tenía en Europa y en México, después de haber vivido tanto tiempo en un solo país sin salir. Mi primer pasaporte lo tenía cuando yo tenía 17 años. Y entonces hay cosas en Europa que me marcaron, y también cuando yo fui a vivir en Europa, entonces había cosas sobre la historia de la Segunda Guerra Mundial, y los sirenas de advertencia, y esas cosas me, me sorprendieron. O cuando llegué a México y había la necesidad de dar mucha propina a mucha gente, yo no estaba tan acostumbrado a eso en los Estados Unidos. Ahorita voy a tener que salir pronto, entonces voy a como pasar rápido a los otros idiomas. Bonjour tout le monde, aujourd'hui c'est le jour 25, on parle un peu des chocs culturels, et je me rappelle la première fois quand je suis arrivé en Europe et après aussi au Mexique, j'avais une mentalité très américaine, et maintenant que ça fait 20 ans que j'habite dehors du pays, j'ai plutôt tendance à maintenant regarder les États-Unis avec un œil comme un étranger, que le pays a évolué, a continué à évoluer depuis que je suis parti, et donc il y a des choses que je ne connais pas si bien, et que j'ai des points de référence presque comme un étranger qui ne connaît pas assez bien certains trucs. Ouais. Hallo an alle, heute ist der 25. Tag, und wir sprechen ein bisschen darüber Culture, und wenn reisen wir nach andere Länder, zum Beispiel für meine erste Reisen in Europa. Es gab viele Dinge, die ich habe gesehen mit meinen Augen von Amerika, und auch in Mexiko. Meine erste Mal in Mexiko. Es war surprising, wie viel Geld ich muss geben für Tipps. Jetzt, es gibt 20 Jahre, dass ich wohne aus den Vereinigten Staaten, und jetzt sehe ich ein bisschen mehr wie Ausländer, wenn ich gehe nach den Vereinigten Staaten. Ja, das ist alle. Ciao a tutti, oggi è il giorno 25, e parlo un po' di differenza culturale, e per esempio quando ho viaggiato la prima volta in Europa o la prima volta in Messico, ho pensato molto come americano, ma oggi ho abitato 20 anni fuori, e mi sento come straniero quando viaggio negli Stati Uniti. Всем привет! Сегодня 25-й день. Я говорю немного о когда я путешествую в разных странах. И первый раз, когда я был в Европе, я увидел много вещей между в США и Европой. И также, когда я был первый раз в Мексике. Сейчас это 20 лет, что я жить outside. И я немного так иностранный, когда я в США. Так, это все на сегодня. Большое спасибо. Пока.